of these old days, one of these old days, and we won't stop.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Transitions from War podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ergo. I'm a Marine Corps veteran who deployed to Iraq and returned home to face another battle, one against trauma, grief, and addiction. After a lot of searching, I found purpose and direction through endurance sports. Join me each week as we talk about more ways you can reconnect to mind, body, and spirit. This week on the podcast, we go deep and we talk about suicide, shame, and ways to properly address people who are suffering, hurting, who have suicidal thoughts, and even those who have completed a suicide, and how we talk to those who have survived it, the family members, the friends, the loved ones. And this conversation is in response to an article written in the Marine Corps Times about a month back, where a Marine Corps colonel was quoted as saying that suicide is a shameful act. Today's guests joining me are Dr. Shauna Springer and Eric Strom. Shauna's been on this podcast a couple times already, and as you know, Shauna Springer is a licensed psychologist who is known by many service members and veterans as Doc Springer, based on the trust she has earned within the tribe and a role as a trusted advisor to many who have served within the military. She has helped hundreds of warriors reconnect with their tribe, strengthen their most important relationships, and build lives that are driven by their deepest values. Shauna and I have been friends and colleagues for many years now, and it's always good to have her back. And through her, I met Eric Strom. And Eric Strom is a licensed independent clinical social worker in Minnesota and is a member of the Minnesota Army National Guard. He spent 5 years as an active duty Marine and deployed twice to the Persian Gulf. Eric specializes in and works with those who have suffered traumatic events in their lives. So to give everyone listening some context to our discussion, we're talking about an article written about a month ago in the Marine Corps Times about how suicide is a shameful act, according to a Marine Corps colonel. He has since retracted that statement, and we don't think that he had any ill intent in saying that, but was merely trying to stop just this epidemic of suicide. How many of us are tired of hearing this number, 20, 22 people a day, veterans or brothers and sisters taking their own lives, completing suicides? And so we discuss what we think is a much more productive way to talk about suicide, to talk about the thoughts, the feelings, why people act, what is really happening here, and furthermore, how we can address those who have completed a suicide, how we can talk about them with their loved ones, with those left behind, and how we can talk to our friends who are suffering, our brothers and sisters, so that they decide to stay here. I've included the links to our article, as well as ways that you, yourself, the listener, can connect to someone and talk if you need to. So take a look at the show notes for those. And everyone, I hope you take something from this podcast. There's a lot to take from it. There's a lot of good talking points. There's a lot of practical application. And just know that while this is a heavy topic, the three of us offer a lot of solutions. There's a lot of hope here. All right, we are all together, and this is a three-headed monster. I got myself, Dr. Shauna Springer, and Eric Strom. So we're all coming together because over last weekend, all of our phones started blowing up with texts about a certain article that came out related to suicide. And it's something we've talked a lot about with each other in our circles, something all of us are deeply connected and affected by. And we looked at this article, and it was taking a certain stance on suicide, and the topic of shame came up, and just seeing the headline for the article really rubbed me the wrong way. It even took me a few days to read it because I had an idea of what it was going to be about, and my idea wasn't too far off. I think we all had a lot of feelings about this. So I want to let Shauna take the reins here and talk a little bit more about how this all came to be and kind of set the tone for this.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's good to be here with you and Eric. You're both Marines that I trust and respect, and you've both kind of been on the front lines as emotional responders for people who are really struggling and suffering in silence in a lot of cases until they've opened up to one of you or to me. And so I think when I read this article, Eric, you had been the person who brought it to my attention first. And so I opened it up and I read the article and I thought, oh no, oh dear. And it wasn't until I started to get more and more emails from different Marines or texts of concern, anger, that I said, let's try and respond to this. Let's try and do something. So the first thing I wanted to say is that, after the sort of rush of frustration, which is normal, I think, I was kind of brought to mind that when any person makes a very strong argument in one direction, it comes from a place of their own experience in some form. And so I was reminded that, I don't know this colonel, but the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. So when somebody really comes with a very strong argument saying that suicide is shameful, for example, I have to believe that it comes from a place of some kind of experience of either feeling pain from that, from the loss of people that he's cared about, or feeling that he feels helpless, perhaps, in wanting to prevent people from dying by suicide that he cares about. And so
one thing that I think we didn't even talk about before, but I actually saw in the comments and it makes a lot of sense is, and Eric, you weigh on this, is the Marine Corps culture. There's a lot of shame involved just in terms of when you're in boot camp, for example, one guy doesn't do what he's supposed to, and then he gets publicly humiliated. I mean, we can all remember the scene where in Full Metal Jacket, Private Pyle gets caught with the open footlocker and the jelly donut, and he sits there or stands there and eats it while everyone does push-ups. I mean, that's shame, and it's really effective. And so it's deeply ingrained in the Marine Corps culture. So one of my beliefs is perhaps that this was just a way of this colonel trying to harness the power that way. And I don't think it's effective, just like I think we might all agree on that in this case. But I think in that sense, it makes a little more sense to me why he might have gone that route.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you're right. We use that shame, and for, whether good or bad, shaming isn't always the best way to go about getting people to do what you need to do, but it is effective in ways. And yeah, I think, Shauna, just like you were saying, that this colonel probably had some past experiences of, whether it was losing Marines or losing, people close to him or whatever. And, when we feel helpless in those places, it creates a sense of shame, and whether it's shame in ourselves and wanting to put that onto others, and so I think there's definitely a combination, of kind of what you were saying, Shauna, and that piece that you're bringing out as well, Mike.
Yeah. And I don't know the colonel, so yeah. I can't speak, from any personal experience, but it may be just the desire not to lose the people that he's leading. Yeah,
you're right. It could be, this is what he knows, an effective tactic and how to get people to respond. And maybe that's a go-to. And also to look at all the comments that came out after we posted our article, was people had a lot of different reactions and how they saw suicide and how they saw completion of a suicide and what, I guess, moral weight they gave it, or a moral framework in terms of, is it shameful or not? Is it selfish or not? Is it heroic or not? There's all kinds of people with all kinds of different opinions. And these are a lot of people who have been affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that suicide causes a great deal of pain that lasts for a very long time for those who are impacted by suicide loss. And I think at the same time, when something causes pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that pain was intended, or that was the motivation of the person who died by suicide. And in fact, what we know from working with people, all of us, that have been at the end of that tunnel, is that it really isn't a place of, it's not a moral thing at that point in the journey. It's really, they're in unspeakable pain, and they have convinced themselves that in some way that their death will be a gift to those that they love, or that it won't really matter at all to anyone. And so they're in a certain mind frame that's really an altered state of consciousness. And that's the two things I think we have to balance, is that it causes so much pain, but the person who is in the end of the tunnel doesn't really have that awareness and can't hold that understanding and that mindset. What do you guys think?
Well, one thing you said that I don't think is part of the conversation a lot of times is that altered state that somebody who is contemplating and maybe ultimately completes a suicide is experiencing. They are not in the state of mind that we are in right now. They don't have all the parts of their brain firing at the same time, not as much access to logic and sound argument maybe like we have.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not being in that rational place, to make those sound decisions, and really being in that, sticking with that altered state of mind of, being at peace with that decision that they've, come to, because like you were saying, Shauna, that, if you feel like you're a burden to somebody, or you feel like, well, people will just be better off without me, then, you've come to this place of really making that decision and not necessarily having the rationale to kind of bring you out of that.
Mm-hmm. There is something, though, that can bring people out of it. If they can, in that moment of time, connect with the people that can speak the lie to them, speak truth to that lie that their death is a gift to those they love, then they do come through it. And
absolutely,
we've all been at the end of that tunnel with many people and seen them kind of come through that really dark time. And so that's something that's so important to point out, is just because you get to the end of the tunnel doesn't mean that your fate is sealed.
Right. Yeah. And just having somebody there who can hear you and validate your experiences and be able to sit with you in that place and, help you come out of that. Right. Like, yeah, this really does suck. This is really hard. And, but honoring where they've been and what they've gone through, and yet being like, look, man, there's, this can get better. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to, end this way.
There's something that you remind me of, Eric, and I'm thinking of times where, I'm sitting at night in the city of Fallujah, full scale urban combat, and it's, closer to hell on earth than I've been before. And the difference what helped me pull through the most was the fact that I had guys sitting with me there. And it wasn't that I had somebody maybe above me telling me tips and tricks to get out of this mindset. Mm-hmm. But I looked around and I had someone that says, yeah, I'm here too. We're both here. And like you said, Eric, they were down in that hole, just sitting there and saying, yeah, this does suck, but we're both here and we don't have to give up here.
Yeah, that's right. When we connect, we survive. And it's not, and you guys know, it's not the brilliant things that we might think we're saying or whatever in those sessions. It's the presence that we have with people as we walk with them through the valleys in their life. That's what keeps them connected.
So a lot of this comes down to trust, it sounds like.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having that trust to be able to have that person, fall back on you, trust you, and creating, just like you're saying, creating that connection, right? Having, that, the word gets thrown around a lot now, but like that, having that tribe, right? Having those people that you're connected to that, you can identify with.
So what is it about when people get into that dark space? Is it that they've been hurting for so long and that the pain is just so deep and they've been sitting around just listening to their own thoughts, maybe not without outside input or input from other people around them?
Sometimes, but sometimes that kind of perfect storm can form very quickly when there's a collection of overwhelming life stressors that hit you all at once. I'll give you an example. I mean, I work at TAPS with a lot of suicide loss survivors, people who have lost family members, loved ones to suicide. Let's say the family members don't have any history of depression or mental health challenges at all. If someone you love dies by suicide, there are risk factors that you may have suicidal thoughts and urges yourself, just from having lost that tremendously important attachment. That's an attachment wound for survivors. And so it can quickly put people at very high risk, even if they have no history of mental health challenges. So we really have to think more broadly about the risk factors for suicide. There's a lot of research now that shows that people who die by suicide don't necessarily have a mental health challenge. There are other things that we don't understand as well as we need to. Things like unaddressed grief, survivor guilt, crippling feelings of shame that can grow or can come to a head very quickly, that can all lead to suicidal ideation. So I don't think there's one suicide profile, but there is one thing that has a power greater than despair, and it is that connection.
What can we take from this? What can we give to people to take action on and to notice with other people or themselves?
Well, I have thoughts on that. I think right now a lot of the training that we give is geared toward recognizing the signs. And it's good to recognize signs, but in working with Marines, really we're looking at a population that's relatively non-disclosing, that has been socialized to compartmentalize their hidden pain, that is professionally good at basically concealing where they're struggling. And so one of the things is the culture change to really help Marines understand that if they trust and love those in their tribe, that what that looks like is risking telling people that they're not okay. Because half the equation is recognizing the signs. But frankly, with Marines, more than often than not, in my experience, it's the trust that I build with them that lets them know they can tell me anything without shame. That has been the factor that's made a difference for my patients. Not because I was so good at recognizing the signs, because we know that clinicians aren't actually that great at predicting who is at risk in many cases. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we hit on a few times this idea of the shame. And I think that's such an important thing for us to talk about because, we were talking about it earlier and how, that can be used in boot camp and things like that, but, for different purposes. But I think when we were looking at things like suicide and the various reasons that people get to that point, certainly looking at shame is in my opinion is really important because there's so much shame, I believe, often wrapped up in that, right? Whether it's, shame about things that you've done, ways that you've, shown up in life, shame of even feeling this way. Whatever it might be. And so, creating this opportunity for Marines or, whoever it might be to have that trusted person to articulate to them, like, look, we all go through crap, right? We all do things. We all have stuff in our life that sucks. And, you can talk about this stuff and that's okay, right? That you don't have to hide behind the shame, or you don't have to bury the shame, right? Because we know that burying things, shame, guilt, whatever it might be, bubbles up in a lot of, really bad ways. So yeah, just creating that opportunity for them to say, like, yeah, I feel safe here to talk about this, that you're not gonna, send me to the inpatient, psychiatric ward or whatever it is.
Yeah, or see you as less than. One thing that makes it tough. And so I think a lot of us can recognize that military culture in general is not about asking for help a lot. One of the big strengths that service members have is being able to will themselves through difficult situations, to deny physical sensations in order to push on. And so that gets confused a lot of times, I think, with being able to ask for help in ways where that doesn't help them. So if they're denying that they're having signs of suicidal ideation, they're thinking about it, or they're denying that they're not doing as well as they should be. And there's also the asking for help and complaining or whining or the same thing. So Shauna, how do we make that distinction? And how do we make the distinction between someone who might be malingering or just whining or actually asking for help in a productive way?
Yeah. So let me add a couple more things, because I'm glad, Eric, that you mentioned the fear of, somebody overreacting and taking your rights away and putting you in an inpatient unit. I was at the VA for 8 years before I worked in my current job, and I think I hospitalized 2 people. One of them asked me to, and the other one was actively psychotic. And so I think, I had a lot of high-risk patients. It was very frightening for people when they thought about disclosing that they were really struggling with perhaps suicidal thoughts, to think that a clinician might impulsively put them in an inpatient unit. In the Marine Corps, in the military, I think there's a tremendous fear that disclosure will set off a chain of events that will threaten their place in the tribe, one way or the other. That the leader will think less of them, or that they'll be sort of singled out or have certain privileges taken away, access to, their firearm might be taken away. That can have tremendous implications for their feeling of relevance, their ability to, be part of the tribe. There's also, can I trust you to take me through this? I don't want to burden you. I think military people, Marines especially, they're very protective of others by nature. And I can't tell you the number of times I heard, well, somebody needs appointments more than I do, or I don't really want to burden you with that. And so even, right? So common. So even with clinicians who have a professional degree and a training, that still continues to be an obstacle for people to open up. So I think one of the best gifts that truly exceptional leaders can offer to those that they lead is to create a space where they mitigate against shame so that people can grow and they can come to that leader and say, hey, man, I'm not all right now. And that they know that that leader has their back, that leader is not going to overreact or underreact, that leader is going to come together with them and say, all right, we've all been there. Let's come up with a plan to get you back to normal or get you back to full speed. And so I think the difference is when you have people that are malingering, they're really doing that for secondary gain. And where you'll see the fork in the road is people who aren't really doing this to get better won't do the work. So coming and saying, I'm not okay is step one. And then people know I'm not soft. I will say, okay, that's how you feel. Here's how this is why that makes sense. Now let's make a plan and you're going to take yourself through this and I'm going to walk with you. And they have to do the work. I'm not going to do it for them. So I'm just there to kind of journey with them. And I think that's where the road splits with people that are not really there to, get back to where they were. They're just kind of saying it because they want to, move in a different direction from where they're serving now. Does that make sense?
It does. And I want to touch on one thing you said about a leader creating a space where their subordinates can come or their peers can come and talk, because I've heard it said many times in different commands or different jobs that, hey, my door is open. You can come talk to me. But it's a great thing to say, but the person has to mean it. There has to be some substance behind that. And I think the leader saying that needs to recognize what that means and to be mindful of when that need arises, that they are able to live up to what they say.
Yep.
Right. Have a demonstration of what they're putting out there. If you're going to have an open door policy, then, don't just say that and then not be out there talking to your Marines or your employees or whatever. You got to put yourself out there and show that that's actually true, creating that trust, building that foundation.
Right. Because they see if someone goes to talk to them and that person gets burned for whatever they said.
That's right.
Then everyone's going to be like, whoop, shut up like clams, because everybody knows, okay, he said that. It doesn't match what he did. So we cannot trust this person. So then again, it comes back to trust.
Yeah, that story of an overreaction, of taking somebody out of the tribe based on a report of them not doing all right will spread like wildfire and will change the whole culture of a unit. And the same way, Mike, we've talked about kind of how suicide memorials are handled and the importance of handling them in a way that recognizes the pain that's caused by the suicide death very honestly and openly, but also doesn't promote shame, because the people that are at that memorial who have lost a brother or sister in arms are the target population that you're trying to reach. And that's an example of how you're showing what you really believe.
Let's take that example of someone who completes a suicide and people are at that funeral. How can that be handled well, and how does that go wrong?
Yeah, so to give a specific example, if it doesn't go well, then we're looking at a funeral or a memorial that doesn't honor who that person was, how they lived, how they served, not just their cause of death, but who they were. I mean, that's a beloved brother or sister to people that are at that funeral. And it's important to balance that with acknowledging the pain, but not to do that in a way that shames the person who died, because the people that are attending that memorial service are looking to their leaders as a critical example of, what do you really think? And if you promote a shame-based message in those critical moments, you're directly increasing risk for anybody who's suffering in silence.
What are some of the things that people say?
Okay, let me give you an example of what right looks like, okay? Let's say that we have a Marine named Trevor who died by suicide. And you have a leader that gets up there and he says to everybody assembled, our brother Trevor died by suicide. He says what it is. And we are all in great pain because of this loss. We really wish that we had known how much he was suffering, because we know that we would have dropped everything to make sure that he knew that he was a part of this brotherhood, and that we care about him, and that he was a vital part of who we are. And so we're all suffering right now because of his loss. We know that he was in pain, and that he did love us, and that he didn't intend for this pain to fall on us. And we're going to grieve him as a unit, and we're going to grieve and stand with his family as an extended family of people that love Trevor and will honor the way that he lived and he served. So that's an example of what right looks like. And what wrong looks like is typically more in the structure of how things are done, when things are given very cursory attention, or there's no memorial, or big distinctions are made, or there's shaming messages. A bit like the article content that we were describing earlier. That would be very, very damaging for people that are suffering in silence and need to see that their leaders are approachable and trustworthy to handle whatever they need to throw at them if they're not okay. But then they have the responsibility to do the work and get to a better place.
When someone brings up a message of shame, or maybe blaming someone who completes a suicide, and we're looking at the example of how a funeral or a memorial service doesn't go well, it's my thought that their reaction is more of an inability to hold their own feelings, an inability to hold and recognize that they are afraid, that they are sad, and this anger, this wanting to push it away comes out with messages like, that was shameful, that was terrible, I can't believe they did that to us. And it's more of that, and not wanting other people to have, or not recognizing that other people need that space to have their own feelings too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And we see that, right? People who, these terrible things happen, and there's this mix of emotions and they don't know what to do with it, right? If somebody hasn't been in a place where they've learned to, like I said, sit with their emotions, to be able to process these emotions, figure out what's going on, then it comes out sideways. It comes out as, well, that was a, shameful thing to do. Why would he do that to us? Whatever it is, making it kind of about themselves because they don't know how to handle that, right? So, I think it is important for people who, are going through this experience, who, have lost someone who completed suicide, to really take a look at their own reaction, right? Like, what's going on for you, right? Like, what is it that this is bringing up? The sadness, the anger, the fear, whatever it might be, and being able to honor that and talk about that. And Shauna, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say. If if some of that is, in your opinion, is appropriate to even bring out in the memorial, like you use the example of Trevor, like, we're here to honor Trevor, and, we lost him and we're terribly sad and we're angry that, that he's gone, and things like that.
Yeah. All of it is appropriate to bring up because it's authentic. I mean, one of the best kind of examples I saw was a leader who allowed himself to become quietly tearful about his pain of losing a dearly beloved Marine. In front of his men, he gave them the gift of this kind of vulnerability as their leader. And he talked about some of the different feelings that he had, which is what you're talking about. And I can tell you there's a huge, like Mike was saying too, a huge range of emotions that hit people when there's been a loss. It's generally been my experience that people often don't see it coming, that they would have done anything to stop it if they had known. And so when someone dies by suicide, it can rock a whole community, a whole unit. It just ripples out. And the feelings that they have are often, this rage with no clear target. They don't know if they're angry at the person who died or the system that didn't support them or the culture or themselves, that they missed something. There's a lot of survivor guilt. What does it mean that, this person died and, I'm still here and, he's so strong. What does this mean for me? There's a lot of fear. Could this happen to me? Could I spin out and have a suicidal crisis in the future? There's a profound helplessness that happens not only for those who are sort of battle buddies, but for leaders. Leaders want to, protect and bring home and keep safe everybody under their charge. And so that's a problem, the profound helplessness that they feel. And so I think giving space to acknowledge that there's a huge range of emotions that are absolutely normal because this is a traumatic loss with questions that may never have answers, but also then making a clear call to action for the people that are at that service. Because this pain is so great, please, if you're struggling, come forward. You can trust me. You can trust your brothers to handle this in a way. We've got your back. Please come forward. Help is there for you. Help can get you to a better place. I like a lot of what General Neller said in his message to the force. And so when this article came out, referenced General Neller's article as though it were, a similar line of thinking, that didn't sit well with me at all, because I thought General Neller showed great heart and great courage and care for Marines in terms of his message about, we're going to do this together and you can come forward. And this is not an uncommon struggle. The message of shame was just not in that message, but it was in the second article that came out. And that's why, we all have been talking about this response being so important.
The distinction between acknowledging our feelings and assigning morality or those feelings to other people. That's a huge distinction. And that's kind of like therapy 101. It's statements realizing that, yeah, I am pissed. Maybe I feel shame. I am sad. I'm afraid. All of these things are true because you are having these experiences. But where that gets messy is when we take that and we say what that person did was wrong, when we throw these things on other people, because that does not create space, not create an environment where other people can understand what's happening with themselves. It pushes it outward.
It does. Yeah. In psychology, we would call this emotional reasoning, that because I feel X, that must mean that you did Y, right? Because I feel so much pain and rage at this loss, that must mean you were wrong to do it or you did this to hurt me. And the two things are not the same thing. And I totally agree that if we go down that path of shame and blame, it just kind of pushes the pain out rather than invites people who may need to address issues in their lives and reckon with them directly. It drives it all underground. I want to read to you a quote that a highly ranked, highly respected Marine wrote to me about this article. So this was from a highly ranked, highly respected Marine that sent this text to me in reference to the article that we wrote the op-ed about, Mike. I thought he was really insightful, and this was, part of what fueled the desire to really make sure we address the article. He said, "This will ostracize the wounded more and create obstacles for warriors that are seeking healing. Actions like this create an insurgency within our population. This makes it tough to break through. It hardens people to the point of self-destruction." And I thought that was really insightful because I think, as you both said, there is a culture of kind of being this perfect warrior that is indestructible. Well, none of us are indestructible. And if you create the self to be totally invulnerable and indestructible, that gives you no room to also be human. And so I'm often telling Marines, one of the best ways to be a badass is to take off your armor and be vulnerable with the people you love and trust. Like, that is being a badass. That is the hard thing that nobody wants to do. That takes a different kind of courage than the kind you show in tactical operations, but it is courage. And so I think leading people into that understanding will help more people come forward and get help rather than driving the behavior and the struggle underground.
Well, there's one thing that stuck out to me about that is that what you said just there, real or effective leaders understand their weaknesses and they understand their strengths. And so for their weaknesses, they are able to surround themselves with people who can help them strengthen in that area, or who can help them in those areas where they might not be as advanced. And the opposite would be to pretend that it's not there and just to bluff their way through it. And that's a sign of a weaker leader or an ineffective leader.
One of the things that we've talked about, Mike, on a past podcast, I think, is the tactical analysis of the war on hopelessness in terms of how these kinds of thinking patterns can ambush people that are isolated, and the importance of bringing the struggles that you have that you would otherwise hold in private out into the open so that you can reckon with them directly. I think that's critical. So then if we agree that that's critical, that we have to face challenges and problems head on to evolve as people or as warriors, then the question becomes, how do we create the conditions for that to happen? And everything we know tells us that creating a condition of shame does not invite people to move towards healing and growth.
So what does it look like? What does it look like on the ground to create those conditions where people can open up and be vulnerable? Let's say we're talking to, a couple of Lance Corporals or a squad of Marines or service members who want that to happen, but just don't know how to make that actionable.
I have thoughts, but Eric, do you want to jump in and share your thoughts?
Yeah. So, and certainly this is something that, that I continue to do. So for those that don't know, after I left active duty, I now serve in the Army National Guard and as a behavioral health officer. And so this is something that we look at all the time, right? How do we get these, especially these younger soldiers to open up and talk to, whether it's me or, their first line leader, whatever it might be, squad leader, fire team leader. And so, it's, excuse me. So it's creating that trust, right? We keep coming back to that. And that's so critical. And I mean, in the military culture, whether you're, the Marine Corps, the Army, whatever it is, you're not going to do anything. Well, maybe not anything, but you're going to do things a lot more effectively for a leader that you trust, right? That's the person that you're going to open up to. That's the person. Well, yeah. That's the person that you're going to be able to, like, I'll follow that guy anywhere, right? If you trust and respect that person. And so, building that trust with those junior enlisted, Marine soldiers, airmen, sailors, whatever it is, or anybody in your life, right? Who's, whether they're a peer or, subordinate, just starting that conversation, being like, look, this, you can come to me and we can talk about this stuff. Let's talk about what's going on, and so a lot of these, younger and, older folks for that matter might not have the vocabulary to even start to talk about what's going on. So helping, one, figuring that out for yourself, right? If you don't know how to talk about this stuff, figure that out for yourself, whether that's going to talk to somebody, going on your own kind of journey to develop that vocabulary, that way of being to identify what's going on for you, and then bringing that to those that that you work with, that you serve with, to be able to say to them, like, look, if you're struggling, let's talk about that. What's going on for you? Examining what's going on in their life, and just being able to get them to start to open up, like, yeah, things are good here, whatever, that you look like you're doing a good job here, but what's going on outside of here, right? Like, what's going on at home? How are things with your spouse, with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever it is, right? What's going on for you financially? It's just creating that conversation, getting people to open up, because the more that you are at that one-on-one level with them, the more that they're going to trust you, the more that they're going to open up, and the more they're going to feel comfortable being like, yeah, like things, yeah, I can come here and this is, kind of an escape for me, but I go home and things really suck. And, that's when you start to really drill down into some of the real issues of what's going on, and get them to talk to you more. So hopefully I didn't go too far off tangent from what you were saying.
On a peer level, how can people do this for their peers? And then after that, I'd like to hear about how can we do this for ourselves in terms of reaching out to other people.
And I have a few thoughts on how clinicians can do this, and leaders as well.
Yeah. So, I think from the peer standpoint, it's a lot of the same, right? I'll come back to a lot of this. We have to be able to identify what's going on in ourselves, right? To be able to start to help those around us. So, if we want to talk to our peers about what's going on, we need to know what's going on for us. So figuring that out, and then just creating that open dialogue. So, letting people know that you're that safe person to talk to, right? Like, look, you can come to me. I'm not gonna, if you tell me like, yeah, man, I'm really struggling, I got financial issues, I got, I'm struggling in my marriage, whatever, that you're not going to turn around and go tell, your other buddy, or your, the other guy.
Unit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not going to turn into a gossip fest because this person confided in you, right? So, making sure that that's well known, that you are that person safe, who can be, that you're safe, that people can confide in you, and it's not going to get around. And then, being able to just hold that space for them, right? And that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and really what that means is just being able to be there. Sometimes people just need somebody to talk to, right? And not always solving the problems for them. Sometimes solving the problem is just letting them talk, hearing what's going on for them. Like we were saying earlier, just acknowledging, like, yeah, man, that really sucks. Yeah, I've been there too. Or, even if you haven't been, like, yeah, that sounds like it's really shitty. And, what do you need from me? What can I do for you to help you out? That's what I think, in terms of that.
I think that's what we all want. Like, this answers the age-old question in so many marriages. When women say, right, dude, I just need you to listen. I don't want you to solve it. I don't want your advice. Because sort of when I zoom out psychologically, what's happening is if somebody's coming to somebody else with a struggle or a challenge, and the other person is trying to solve it because they love the person who's struggling, they care about them, they don't want them to suffer, right? So it's not from bad intentions, but they start suggesting, oh, here's what you could do, or have you done this? What they're actually doing is saying, I don't trust you to handle your own problems. I don't think you're strong enough to come through this. And I think I know better than you. So what you've done is you've just sort of quickly put them in a one down relationship to you. And you've said, I outrank you. And so I've thought about this, in terms of my clinical role. The book I've been writing, Mike, about kind of my transformation as somebody who has become trusted within the tribe has been about making this transition from being Dr. Springer to being somebody that doesn't care a whole lot about rank or, what my education is, that trust outranks rank every day. Trust outranks rank. And so standing on rank or academic credentials or where we went to school or how long we were in school, probably too long, it just isn't what is going to get to people that are suffering. So I think one of the best gifts of, rank is the ability to decide when you put that aside. And when you lay your rank aside for somebody and you say, we've all been there. Like, I've been through struggles. Everybody's been through different kinds of struggles. And you show that you're authentic and you know your people and you care about them. They don't need you to fix it. They will find the strength. And that's what I mean by we draw from the strength of our tribe. Just because we can go to them, find them to be safe, draw from their strength, and then we do the work. They don't need to do it for us.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add something to that too, Shauna. And this you were talking about if you're solving it, you're kind of putting them in this one down, creating this power dynamic. And the thing that I would add to that too is if you feel the need to fix it, like why? What's going on for you that you feel like you have to fix it as opposed to just be in there with them? So we don't have to get too far into the weeds on that, but just something to think about.
Here's what I'm hearing with both of these conversations or both of these comments you guys had is that, one, going back a little earlier, leaders and all of us need to have awareness of ourselves, understanding what's happening in ourselves. And two, we need to create a space where others can trust and confide in us. And the last time we got together on the show, we talked about the idea of saying something that scares us just a little bit, setting the tone, leading by example, and confiding in people we care about, or so they know they can do the same with us, not just waiting for them to come to us, but taking that first step.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. That was part of our last conversation on the podcast that we did for episode 50, I think it was, that if we build a culture of trust in our relationships, that the first thing that people disclose to us shouldn't be that they're in a suicidal tailspin. It should be that they got their ass kicked at work today, or that they had an interaction with somebody that made them feel terrible about themselves for a few minutes. If we get in the habit of calling people and talking with people directly about the stuff that's hard to talk about, then the really important stuff is just part of that pattern. It's not something out of the blue,
It needs to start a lot earlier than that. You're right. I'd argue it needs to start even earlier than that. Like, you need a friend, you need someone you can tell, hey, I looked at some weird porn and I feel a little, I don't know what to do with it.
And I feel dirty.
And then we get to the suicide stuff as we build up.
Now you're really taking it down to the Marine Corps level, Mike.
I saw things I can't unsee.
Right.
Where do we go from here? Because I think we covered a lot, and I think when it comes down to it, we need to check in with ourselves. We need to create that space for other people, and we need to offer that by leading by example and being vulnerable with other people we care about. And I think, Shauna, you hit that nail on the head, saying that trust will beat rank anytime. Yeah. The power of rank is the discretion of when to use it and when to take it off. What else do you guys have that we want to go out on?
That you have more power when you take off the rank than you do when you use it. And that I would like to talk about for a minute that, Mike, you've been on the Marines retreat we did out in Chico with the 2-7 Marines and seen that sacred space. And so on Thursday, I'm going to fly back to Texas and join some of those Marines and some Marines from another unit, 2-3, who have been doing this beautiful gathering every year. They pull the tribe together, and it's a healing weekend. And, the leaders in the group, I'm not the leader. I partner with them. I say, what do you need? And we work out some ideas for the programming, and then I come and I serve. And I walk in that place of trust in that circle. And so being able to do that is really a privilege, because I see what the tribe can do for each other. And I have the most power when I can facilitate the connection and that trust and love between the people that already trust and love each other. And I got a call, this morning, just randomly, from a warrior wife. It's what I call the wives of Marines, that are strong women that love their Marines. So this warrior wife called me, and she asked me to come out and do another Marine reunion for another unit of Marines. I don't know how she found me, but it was a really good initiative that is starting to kind of happen, I think, all over the country. Actually, your friend Brandon Fraser, also is thinking about doing some gatherings for Marines back on the East Coast. And so what we're seeing is this, I think, hopefully shift towards something really positive, which is that people are starting to understand that if you can bring the tribe together, the people that already have that existing bond of trust and love, this reunion model, and then you resource it with people that can really help develop the understanding of how we can get ambushed by hopeless thoughts, how to keep ourselves, going down the good path and staying in the fight and finding meaning in our lives, that really amazing things can happen. And I've also seen Marine leaders lead really beautifully. So I've seen them. I did a briefing of about 200 Marines one time on a base in Texas. And it was actually not a Marine base, but there was a group of Marines stationed down there. And I went down there, and their leader stood up in front of them and said, I would take a knee any day before considering taking myself out. I would take a knee and say, I need to get some help. And this was their leader. And so putting that kind of vulnerability on display creates a whole culture where people are much more likely to get the help they need and then get better and get back in action. It's not, meant to be a path towards, diversion from a meaningful life as a warrior. It's just part of the path of the warriors. Times when, because none of us are totally invulnerable, we're going to struggle. And knowing that we can turn to other people and then get the help, do our part, do the work we need to do, and get back to it is, I think, the other thing I would leave with.
I like it. That's beautiful. Eric, what do you got? Any saved rounds?
The biggest takeaway that I would have for people is, like we've said, being that person that is creating that trusting environment for those that can come to you, and then finding that person that you can trust, right? Because you might be the person that people are always coming to, but you have to have that person to turn to as well. I mean, we all know as providers, sometimes we got to take a knee, right? Sometimes we got to have that person to turn to. So, creating that tribe, creating that community around you so that you have those that you can talk to, that you trust, that you can feel safe to open up to with, whatever content it is. That's the biggest thing that I think I would say out of all of this is just having that person that, that you can talk to, that you can say anything to, that, they're going to have your back and are going to be there to support you.
I appreciate the work that both of you are doing, and I appreciate the fact that you'd come together with me and you allowed me to be part of this. So this is fun stuff, guys. Thank you to Shauna and thank you to Eric for joining me today on the show. And thank you to everyone for listening, of course. Everyone listening, do me a favor. Text or call someone you served with. Check in on them. Let them know you care about them. And if you're hurting, let people know. Open up. Talk to people. Think about what it's like when you get a text or a call from someone who needs some help. Of course you're going to be there for him. And that's how your buddies feel about you. So everyone, take a look at the show notes. For those of you who need to make that call right now, it's 1-800-273-8255. You'll be able to speak with someone confidentially that's 24 hours, 7 days a week. And press 1. Also, you can text 838-255 to talk to someone immediately. All right, everybody, that's it for our show this week. If you like what you heard, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all those good things where you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next week.
One of you going.